Edmonton Police Service is launching the first phase of its body-worn camera program. Means Edmontonians can expect to see more police officers wearing cameras on their uniforms. The change is part of a province-wide rule mandating all police officers in Alberta wear cameras. Ron Anderson is the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer with EPS and joins us in studio. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Mark.
So what is the goal of the body-worn cameras?
So as you already mentioned, the province has mandated the adoption of body-worn cameras across all the agencies. The goal primarily is to provide the public some level of assurance and transparency around the police acting appropriately and professional when they're engaging individuals. Also there to ensure that there's evidence associated to files, so that a lot of the video that will be captured are related to investigations. They'll be disclosed to the Crown. And I think ultimately speaking, it's part of the broader transparency work that we try to do with the communities as well.
One of the questions that's always come around in this is when do police officers start recording? Because they have control of that, right?
They do. They have control of the recording. However, it is always recording in the background, just not with audio. So if they do not have the time to turn it on, or for some reason it doesn't activate when they try to push it, it'll still be recording without audio. But the policy is to turn it on anytime there's going to be a situation where there's an enforcement or an evidentiary discussion with an individual. So if the best practice, we kind of tell the officers, if you think this is going to go down a path where there's an investigation or a charge potential, turn it on.
How easy is it to turn it on?
Hit the button twice, it beeps loudly so everybody knows it's on, and there's a flashing light on the front to let them know that it's recording.
And so then what happens with that footage?
So that footage gets wirelessly sent back to online storage. It gets retained for a retention period depending on the type of file it is, minimum of 2 years. Mm-hmm. If it's something like a homicide, it's indefinitely, for example.
Right.
And that's retained there both for court purposes, and should there be a complaint against the officer, then it's retrievable by the Professional Standards Branch.
So there were a handful of officers who wore these cameras during the pilot project last summer. So what did they report back? What did you hear from them, and what did you learn?
Yeah, so there were 35 officers that had the cameras last summer, and primarily they were in our downtown core. The things we learned from them were, some of them were technical around how to attach the camera properly, the types of mounts that work best for us, those types of things. We also learned a lot of lessons about how to train the officers to use them appropriately, and a lot of the policy changes that we put in place as we learned from other agencies, and then also as we learned from our own officers on the street. So policy, practice, and technology tools.
I mean, they're not that new, right? I mean, and you've been talking about this, EPS at least has been talking about it for a long time, and we see them being used a lot in the U.S. We see that coverage coming a lot. So when you've looked at all these sort of things, what things did you consider?
Well, there's lots. There's the cameras themselves are quite simple. So when you talk about the technology of the camera, there isn't a lot of differences between most of the cameras out there. The differences come in how you get that video back, how you store it, the online costs or on-premise costs associated with that, as well as the tools for disclosure to the Crown and redacting for privacy purposes as well. That's really where things differentiate between different vendors. And depending on what your service requires, that's the direction you'll go.
Mm-hmm. You're phasing out dash cams in favor of body-worn cameras. Why not do both, which has been suggested by some?
Yeah, so we actually never had dash cams. We had started a pilot on dash cams a couple of years ago when the province we were heading down the path to procure dash cams, not just a pilot. When the province did their mandate, we pivoted to the body-worn in order to meet that mandate. So we still want to do in-car cameras as well, or the dash cams. Costs have obviously become an issue, but with the mandate, the body cameras jump the queue.
Are costs related to the storage of video? I mean, people might not realize, or maybe they do, that is we know that here, being in television, that costs a lot to keep that storage.
Yeah, the majority of the cost after you actually procure the cameras is in that storage. It's also a bandwidth question for if you're transferring data from the cameras wirelessly, et cetera.
Right.
So the bulk of the cost is on the storage, and the longer you have to store it, then the higher quality the video gets, the more expensive that gets as you go.
What kind of feedback did you get from EPS officers on it?
By and large, the feedback from the officers who are in the pilot and the ones that have received them in the last few days is positive. Most of the officers found that they were easy to use. A lot of the officers were happy to have that extra camera there, extra evidence there for the files they're investigating. And the other benefit is if there is an incident and there's a complaint, it has generally halved the time for an investigation at ACERT or others. So the time savings around the investigation goes down if there is a complaint.
I mentioned that we've seen the use of these body-worn cameras in the U.S. a lot, and they allow pretty quick access to them. Very famously in the last week, Tyreek Hill, who was a Miami Dolphins receiver, was taken down by a Miami police officer, and it's made headlines everywhere. You've seen that. What do you think when you see those kind of interactions and the way the body cameras are in the U.S. made available to the media right away?
So jurisdictions are going to have different regulations around FOIP. They're also going to have different regulations around how investigations are handled. In that particular case, that most likely would have come in as a professional standards branch complaint. With the video, that would have been a very short investigation, most likely for our service as well. Releasing the video to the public, in our situation, there's also the consent piece from the individual who's on that video. So in that case, Mr. Hill may have wished for that video to be released and may have said sure. Or in the legislation in Miami, perhaps the police are able to do that quicker. In our case here, we have to be cognizant of the FOIP laws. We also have to recognize that if there's a complaint around a serious injury, that's going to go to ACERT, and that becomes their evidence, not ours to release. So it's going to depend, unfortunately.
Now, the province says full implementation of this program expected in the 2025-2026 fiscal year. So will EPS be ready for that?
Yeah, that's the plan. So we're in phase one at this point. The province hasn't put a firm deadline on that implementation yet. So we're still working with the provincial steering committee, which has representation from all agencies, the province and the court side, to identify what exactly that timeline will be. But that is our rollout plan. So the 280 that we're working on now will be there. And then in April, once we see what the provincial fiscal situation looks like and how that's going to work with this project, then we'll look at continuing the rollout.
Well, CBC did reach out to the province to ask who would pay for it. They didn't really answer that question. Do you know, does EPS, are you going to foot the bill to start?
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest question associated here. We've obviously had conversations with our commission. When we were in front of City Council in the supplemental capital budget last year, which we were able to transfer dollars to start this program, we did raise that as a specter, and we continue to have a conversation with the province about that. For us, it's about $11 million a year for all of the costs and redaction and disclosure. So it's a big question mark. We don't have a firm answer yet.
Are you going to have basically a group of people who work to manage this a whole separately from the police department in a way, right? I mean, you're not a sworn officer, right?
I'm not, no.
No. So that group of people is going to be part of that, I would think.
So the individuals that will be managing the video are actually in my bureau, and they're the ones that do the disclosure to the Crown, and will also be the ones that will do redaction for disclosure or for FOIP requests or other reasons for privacy purposes.
Ron, thanks for coming in this morning. Appreciate it, and we'll follow this story as it continues to go forward.
Pleasure. Thank you.